All right, so this is presentation 2 for Unit 5 over Europe, and today we're going to look at the physical geography of Russia. And so I showed you this in the first presentation, just comparing the size of Russia to the United States. So Russia's a lot bigger. It takes up a sixth of all the land on Earth. Goes through about, it's 11 or 12 time zones, so it's about half of all the time zones we have. So it's huge. Just to give you a perspective, it's closer from here to London than it is from one side of Russia to the other. It expands a great distance. So, you need to know what the republics refers to. So, we talk about Russia and the republics. The republics are all the countries that are now independent that used to be part of the Soviet Union. So, that's going to be Central Asia, like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, and also Transcaucasia, which is going to be Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia, as well as Eastern European countries like Belarus and Ukraine, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, things like that, were all part of the Soviet Union at one point. And as I was mentioning already, it covers a sixth of the total land surface on Earth. So as you can see, it's absolutely huge, going from Europe all the way across Asia, bordering Japan and China and Mongolia. So to put it in perspective, so looking at the size of Russia, of course it's huge, but the amount of arable land isn't that large. So the U.S., which is a lot smaller than Russia, has 173,000 hectares of land that you can use for farming. India, 160,000. China, 142,000. Russia only has 122,000 hectares of arable land. So even though it's so huge, there's not a lot that land can support as far as production. And so that's limited, of course, in how much you can farm there. So a couple of questions just to see if you can get this. So Russia is A, European, B, Asian, C, both, or D, neither? And the answer is that it's both. So most of the country of Russia is actually in Asia, but most of the population lives in the European side. About 75% live on the European side of Russia. So Eurasia, so the question here is what splits Europe from Asia? We mentioned this in the previous PowerPoint, and that is, of course, the Ural Mountains. So that's the dividing line, basically. So 75% of all Russians live on this side of Russia. The other 25% are scattered abroad, kind of like along the southern part of Russia here, near Mongolia and China. All right, some other places we need to know. Of course, the Caucasian Mountains are in Transcaucasia. So this separates really the Middle East from Russia. So down here to the south, you have Iran and Iraq, and then over to Syria as well. So, of course, here you're going to have a larger Muslim population living in that area. So we kind of zoom in here. So borders the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. You get the Black Sea on the left, Caspian Sea on the right. In this area, like I said, used to be controlled by the Soviet Union, and Russia actually invaded Georgia back in 2009, trying to take it back. And so we helped Georgia and supported them against Russian incursion. And then you have the Volga River, which is the main river in Russia. It's the longest river in Europe, actually. And so 60% of all of Russia's river traffic, trading, and stuff like that occurs along the Volga River, and you can see the cities that it hits along here. All right, and then, of course, the Black Sea. I mentioned how that's important because it gives you access for the Russians through the Dardanelles and Bosporus Straits to get to the Mediterranean Ocean. So you can see the Black Sea there. There's some black algae, which gives the name Black Sea. There's hold on, there we go, Black Sea from space. And then you get the Caspian Sea. There's Caspian Sea from space. And then the Aral Sea we're going to talk more about later, but real quick I want to show you how it's shrinking. And so the Aral Sea is a great example of how the Russians, especially when the Soviet Union was in charge, really exploit their natural resources to the point of to where they destroy them. So here you see the Aral Sea in 1977, and then 1989 it's shrinking, and then about 2006 it was close to being pretty much gone. And if you look at current day pictures, actually next slide has that. You can see 2009, 2011, 2012, 2013. Now this part is gone, actually. So here in the next 10 years, most likely, the Aral Sea will not exist anymore. And this is simply because of over-irrigation, basically overuse of the water flowing into the Aral Sea, and therefore the Aral Sea is disappearing because of that. And then you have Lake Baikal. This actually holds 20% of all the world's fresh water is in that one lake. It's also the deepest lake in the world. So if there was ever a war over water, over fresh water, that one lake would be where you would definitely want to control. All right, then you got the Ob River. Basically, this is in Siberia and it flows north into the Arctic Ocean, but this is the drainage basin for the Ob, so it's the largest drainage basin. Can't say that word for some reason. Drainage basin. There we go. In Russia. All right, and then you also have the Amur River, which is the border with China. And then your four main regions you need to know. We got European Russia, so this is where most of the Russians live. Transcaucasia down here, which we mentioned already. Central Asia, all the stands. And then Siberia, which is pretty much all of that. Okay, so real quick, European Russia. So this is known as Western Russia. So anything west of the Ural Mountains. So like I said, 75% of the population lives here. This is where the Northern European plain comes in, so they get Chernosem. So this is where most of the farming is going to occur, which is going to be one of the main reasons why so many people live in this area. So it's mainly agricultural is what you're going to see, especially the south, kind of western part of Russia. And then a lot of industry as well, like in Moscow and St. Petersburg and places like that. Of course, Moscow is the capital. St. Petersburg is another major city. It was built about 500 years ago. And then Kiev, which is in Ukraine. But that's actually your first like Russian empire going back about 1,200 years ago. Was Kiev. It's like your first Russian city to ever exist, ever be built. So Russians really, if you get into their ethnicity, they're a mix of Vikings and Slavic people. The Vikings are the ones that actually started Kiev, and they actually enslaved the Slavs. It's actually where we get our word slave from. It's from the enslavement of the Slavic people. All right, Northern European plain. So like I mentioned this before, again, it goes from France through Germany, Poland, all the way into Russia. So that's the main area for farming. And as I mentioned too, 75% of the population lives in Western Russia in that box right there. Another way, of course, you can see this is looking at Russia at night. And so you can see this part of Russia is more lit up. And then the rest of the population's along the southern border, because again, this is Siberia up here. It's really cold. And so most of the people are going to live along the south, along the Trans-Siberian Railway. All right, which you can see here. So Trans-Siberian Railway goes from St. Petersburg all the way to Vladivostok near North Korea and Japan. It's kind of the main port to trade with Japan. And so, I mean, this this thing goes forever. It would take about 6 or 7 days to ride the train from St. Petersburg to Vladivostok. So Siberia, this is, of course, the other side of the Ural Mountains, and it's pretty much empty, barren land. I mean, there are some people that live there, but not a lot. And then you get all the way over to the Kamchatka Peninsula. This area is just lit up with volcanoes. It's this peninsula right here. And so, I mean, again, it's just pretty much barren. Hardly anybody lives there for the most part. So extremely cold. Because of this, this was used for like Russian work camps and stuff. So back during the Soviet Union, if you were an enemy of the state or they didn't trust you for whatever reason, you got arrested and you disappeared, most likely you would disappear to Siberia and go to what's called a gulag, which was a Russian work camp in Siberia, and probably freeze to death. And so, like I said, there's the Kamchatka Peninsula, which is on the Ring of Fire, and you can see how close Alaska comes to Russia. So right here, this is the United States. That's the Aleutian Islands, all part of Alaska. Go pretty much right up to the Russian peninsula there. There's the Ring of Fire. So again, you can see the Kamchatka Peninsula there on the Ring of Fire and Alaska and how it jets out right next to Russia. And so Sarah Palin lived over there. She could see Russia from her house. And then Transcaucasia is this, again, tiny little area between the Middle East and Russia. So this area, and this is also why Russia would want to control it, is because of their natural resources. They have iron ore, oil, natural gas, very rich in those things. And so this would be huge for Russia to be able to control. So after losing it, after the fall of the Soviet Union, definitely hurt them economically. So that's why they would like to be able to get that part back. And then Central Asia is your stands: Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan. So this area is really sparsely populated, landlocked pretty much for the most part. So, I mean, there's not a lot of economic activity here. There is some farming, but the land isn't super arable. So, yeah, so, I mean, there's not a whole lot going on in these countries, economically speaking, because of that. All right, climate and vegetation. Of course, Russia's middle and high latitudes. And there's really not any warm ocean currents. So, we talked about how Europe stays warm because of the warm ocean currents coming from the North Atlantic drift. Well, Russia is not getting that. They suffer a lot from continentality, so it gets a lot colder in Russia than it does anywhere. Russia is considered a humid continental climate zone. This is going to be comparable to like Chicago is humid continental. So it can get quite humid during the summer, and you actually get warm in Moscow and St. Petersburg. During the winter, it's going to be extremely cold. And then Siberia, of course, has a subarctic climate. And then, of course, as you get to the Arctic Circle, it gets to an Arctic climate. But pretty much all this is going to be tundra for the most part. And so you kind of get an idea of the temperatures. So Yakutsk is a city in Siberia. And here you can see the temperature range. And so, for example, in the summer, so in July, you're looking at about probably around 20 Celsius maybe, which is about 60 degrees Fahrenheit or so. And then once you get below 0, Celsius is the same as Fahrenheit. So you're looking at, and this is average temperatures, you're looking at -40 for a high in like December and January. January is a little bit lower actually. So, and they actually don't get a lot of precipitation, so it's not like it's snowing all the time or anything. It just doesn't melt that much. All right, and then of course, like I said, most of it's tundra. So in here, it's going to see mainly like short grasses in the summer, some lichens, mosses, small shrubs, flowers do bloom. So in the summer, you'll see that for a short period of time. But pretty much everything's permafrost, so you can't really use this for much of anything. You get an idea where all the tundra is in the world, so you can see all northern Siberia, very far northern part of Scandinavia, and then Canada, Alaska, Greenland, all that is your tundra. And then you also have a large forest that goes through Russia called the taiga. And the taiga goes from Scandinavia all the way through Russia and actually continues through Alaska and Canada and a little bit in the U.S. It's like one continuous forest. It's like a green belt going around the earth. And this is a giant forest with some huge trees, kind of like the redwoods in California. Very, very thick, dark forest. And then you also have in Central Asia, you have the grassland and the steppe. So this area, right through Central Asia, and this was important for trade. So like your Silk Roads, which we'll talk about when we get to history. Silk Roads connected Asia over to Europe for trade for thousands of years, and they used this land to be able to get across on. And so here you can see, again, how flat it is. And so this was good for trade routes and stuff like that, and of course for farming as well. And we're not going to do the short essay on this one, so don't worry about that. All right, so that's it on the physical geography of Russia. Of course, in class, you received a map to do for Russia as well, so make sure you get that done on time.